Hello and welcome to today's episode on how to learn Excel through a live project. In yesterday's episode, we learned a complex formula of how to implement SUMIFS with multiple scenarios, and that too by selecting the criteria fields from another sheet. Even though that kind of formulas to be used in various scenarios in your day-to-day activities, there is an easy method which Excel has provided so that you can analyze your data according to the choice of yours. That is by using a facility called pivot table. With pivot table, you can slice and dice your data based on any criteria you need. So let us jump directly to the course and see how we can use the pivot table. Later, we will be also be looking at how to use pivot chart to visually represent your data. But for now, let us focus on pivot table and let us learn that first. Let us start with our Excel tracker workbook, which we have been working on. So the first thing to note is I have done some changes to this worksheet so that we are having enough data for us to learn how to use the VLOOKUP. So the changes which I have done, let me explain it one by one. First of all, I have hidden the month and year column which we have created in our previous episode. Let me hide it again. In the similar way, in our expense head table sheet also, I have hidden the month and year row which we have created. And in addition to that, I have made all the columns as a currency symbol. And along with that, I have added one more total for all the month here. Similarly, I have done it for the expense head column also. Let's just make everything as bold so that we can understand it better. Okay. And in the expense tracker, we had only some three or four set of data. So I created some fictitious data entry towards my monthly expenses. So one more column I might have added is the notes so that we know how to use the filter condition to arrive at the expenses. Okay. So what we have done so far is for calculating the expenses we have done towards every expense head and for every month we use a complex formula called SUMIFS. So what is the shortcut we have? The shortcut we have is called pivot table. Let us learn step by step about how to implement a pivot table. The pivot table is one of the very powerful tool by which you can analyze your data according to your choice. So how do you create a pivot table in an Excel sheet? The first requirement for you to use a pivot table is that your data should be organized in a tabular structure. So it is not necessary that you have to define it as a table, what we have seen earlier as format as table here, but anything which is having a header row and the rows and columns of data you have, you can create a pivot table. So let us see how we will start creating the pivot table. So I'm keeping my cursor in the serial number, the first row, the first column of my table of data. So this is my table of data, which starts from row number 2 and it ends at column I, and it goes up to any number. It can be any number. You don't bother about how many number of rows we have. So what all I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my cursor in any of the table, any of the column. It's always better to keep it in the first row, first column of your table of data, and then go for insert, and you can select pivot table. If you open this caret icon, the mouse cursor, you'll have from a table of range or from an external data source. For now, our focus is to learn how to create pivot table from our existing table or range. So let me just select it. So as soon as I select it, it will confirm you whether the data the data range is selected properly. So you see a small line is appearing around the table. We just go through that. You can figure out that all the data in our table are selected. The next thing what you need to do is to select where you want to insert your pivot table to be. You can either create a totally new worksheet for your pivot table, or you can embed the pivot table inside your existing sheet itself and existing worksheet, and you can choose where you want the pivot table to be inserted. But it is always better to create a new worksheet. It depends on your usage and the amount of data you have. For better understanding, it is always better to create it as a new worksheet. And as soon as I click, which on the left hand side you have the pivot table, and on the right hand side it has listed down all the fields you have in your table. And what simply you can do is you can select any of the fields and you can create the pivot table. Let us create it step by step. So my for me, the first thing I want is I want to find the expenses I made towards every expense head. So for that, let me just select, let me delete this and select the expense head. I selected. As soon as I select the expense head, everything, whatever I have in my expense head, I mean expense tracker, all the expense head which I have used. Suppose in my expense head listing, I may have multiple things, but for example, the dress purchase, I may not have spent anything during this period. So then it won't come. So it will, everything is coming in as a unique record in this. Now, what I want is I want to find how much of money I spent towards car EMI, celebrations, dress purchase, everything so far. I don't have any criteria of in which month I have spent or anything. So whatever I have spent so far and I have recorded in my expense tracker, everything I want to find the total. I just select the total sum, and if you actually look at the sum, the amount, since it is a numeric value, it will automatically come in the sum value, the quadrant. And here, if you want to find the total amount spent, you can change it, make it a sum. If I want to say how many times I have spent all these things, I can go to value field setting and I can say count. So 3 times I have paid my monthly apartment monthly maintenance. 3 times I paid my car EMI. For celebration, I spent only once. And for dress purchase, I spent twice. Eat outs, I did 3 times. Everything you can do. Let us go back to the basic of sum. So this is what is the total I have spent, and it will give you the grand total too. Now, let us break it a little further. So I want to see how much I have spent per month. So what all I'm going to do is just select year and month. So as soon as I select year and month, it will say in the January month I sent $50, February I've done $50, in the March I've done $50. Similarly, for every expense head what you have, it will give you the breakup. You can analyze it. So now I don't want based on the expense head, but I want it based on the payment type. It's very simple. You just unselect the expense head and go to the payment mode. So here you can identify how much you spent through Amazon Pay, how much you spent through Apple Pay, everything. So now it is coming according to the month. But if you want total amount spent so far, you just remove the year month. So here you will get through Amazon Pay so far you spent $114, through Apple Pay $10, through my HSBC account 013 I spent $5,233. So everything you can play around. So whatever you want, it can be done. So let me just see another way also. I'm removing the payment mode but I'm going to see what I spent through different associated bank. So through cash, I spent $321. Through my HSBC, I have spent this much. HSBC credit card, I spent $145. So my Standard Chartered Bank, I have one bank account and one credit card. These are all the amount I have spent. Let us proceed further. How we can analyze it in more detailed way. Now that I have made an analysis based on my payment bank, the next thing I want to see in each bank, in each month, what is the amount I have spent through. So it's easy again. I'm just selecting the month here. So as soon as I select the month, through cash, in January, what I have spent, February, March, and I have up to July, the records. If I have more records, everything will come. But if I go to the HSBC Bank 013, I spent only during January, February, and March. I don't have it in July. So credit card I made only in February, March, and July. So all these things you can analyze. You want to break it further. You want to see on which day you have spent all these things. Just select the day here, and it will go with an expandable option, and you can see on which day you have spent it. Now everything is there in a row wise data. But what we have done in our expense tracker is like we have a month wise columnar breakup. Can we do the same thing in my table here? Yes, you can. What all I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the month to column, and I don't need these dates. Let me remove this date. So as soon as I move the month to the column, so it is giving me the values on January, what is spent, what is February, what is March, and what is July. April, May, June, and all are not coming here because we don't have record of expenses during that month. Let me just add one more small example to see practically how we are doing. I'm going to insert one row in between for the month of April here. I will tell you why I'm inserting here. So I say that 20th of April 2024, I made some payment towards provision purchase. I made it through, for example, Google Pay. These formulas are not coming because I inserted it. And purchase from Smart Bazaar, $200. If I go now here, and it won't come. Why? Because what all you need to do is right click and say refresh. As soon as I refresh this particular pivot table, so the amount I spent in April is already coming, and I made it through my HSBC account. We can verify it here. So this is what it is. I made it through the HSBC account, and it's a Google Pay. So if I'm changing it instead of my payment associated bank account, if I select through payment mode through Google Pay during April, I made this spent. Let us see one more thing which you need to be aware of when you are working with the pivot table. So we have created one record for April, and when we are creating that record, I said that you need to insert it in between, because then I said like we will see about why we are not adding it to the bottom later. So let us see now. Let's look at our VLOOKUP now. We have data up to, let me refresh it. We have data for January, February, March, April, and July. Let me create a new record as the last row of our expense tracker, for example. So let me create it as 80. I created a new record for car EMI on 1st of August 2024, which is paid through Standard Chartered Bank my account number, and the amount I have paid is $500, for example. If I go to the pivot table, and if I say refresh, for example, then also it is not coming. Why? Because the data range what we have selected for this pivot table is having an absolute reference starting from row 2 to column I and up to row 81 column I. How do we know that? Let us go to that. We'll go to the pivot table analysis and let's just open the change data source and press change data source. If you go there, it is very clearly mentioned it is from A2 to I81. So that means it is up to 81. The newly created record is 82, so it won't come. So when if you are adding new thing, either you create a new pivot table or you just come to the data, you just come back. Let me just go back to the pivot table analysis and change data source and select change data source and change it to 82. So it is always better you be aware of this. And as soon as I selected it for the August month, the $500 which I spent is already coming. So, like this, there are so many small things which we need to learn about the pivot table. To explain everything related to the pivot table, we will create a totally new video in which we'll cover all about the pivot table and explain everything what you can do both with the pivot table as well as the pivot chart. So for now, as a basics, this much is enough for us to learn about how to use the pivot table. So we'll cover in our tomorrow's episode about how to use the conditional formatting. Let us just give a brief about why we need the conditional formatting and how we are going to use it. So if you go to the expense tracker, we say our monthly budget for home EMI is $750, but we are spending $950. So if anything, and similarly, the next one, apartment monthly maintenance, our monthly budget is $60, but we are spending only $50. So what if I want to show every record, whichever is spent more than the budgeted value, for example, in a different color? So we cannot do it one by one and change it, but we need a facility by which it automatically identifies what has been spent more than budgeted. So for that, we'll be using the feature called conditional formatting, which is readily available, and we'll learn about it. There are multiple options available with conditional formatting. We'll learn all the essential things. Thank you very much. And once again, let me request for your comments and feedbacks on how we are progressing through our Excel learning journey. And we welcome all your comments, whatever it may be. And for every comments, I will be providing my feedback personally, and I'll be replying to that. And I also request you all to provide the support by subscribing to the channel and sharing the channel with your friends and colleagues and providing the like button. Thank you very much. See you in the next episode with yet another interesting journey of how to use conditional formatting. Thank you.